This is the public domain novel, The Mystery of Edwin Drood, written by Charles Dickens. Chapter 15. Impeached. Neville Landless had started so early and walked at so good a pace that when the church bells began to ring in Cloisterham for morning service, he was 8 miles away. As he wanted his breakfast by that time, having set forth on a crust of bread, he stopped at the next roadside tavern to refresh. Visitors in want of breakfast, unless they were horses or cattle, for which class of guests there was preparation enough in the way of water, trough and hay, were so unusual at the sign of the tilted wagon that it took a long time to get the wagon into the track of tea and toast and bacon. Neville, in the interval, sitting in a sanded parlour, wondering in how long a time after he had gone the sneezy fire of damp faggots would begin to make somebody else warm. Indeed, the tilted wagon, as a cool establishment on the top of a hill, where the ground before the door was puddled with damp hoofs and trodden straw, where a scolding landlady slapped a moist baby, with one red sock on and one wanting. In the bar, where the cheese was cast aground upon a shelf, in company with a mouldy tablecloth and a green-handled knife, in a sort of cast-iron canoe, where the pale-faced bread shed tears of crumb over its shipwreck in another canoe, where the family linen, half-washed and half-dried, led a public life of lying about, where everything to drink was drunk out of mugs, and everything else was suggestive of a rhyme to mugs. The tilted wagon, all these things considered, hardly kept its painted promise of providing good entertainment for man and beast. However, man, in the present case, was not critical, but took what entertainment he could get, and went on again after a longer rest than he needed. He stopped at some quarter of a mile from the house, hesitating whether to pursue the road, or to follow a cart track between two high hedgerows which led across the slope of a breezy heath and evidently struck into the road again by and by. He decided in favour of this latter track, and pursued it with some toil, the rise being steep and the way worn into deep ruts. He was labouring along when he became aware of some other pedestrians behind him. As they were coming up at a faster pace than his, he stood aside against one of the high banks to let them pass. But their manner was very curious. Only 4 of them passed. Other 4 slackened speed and loitered as intending to follow him when he should go on. The remainder of the party, 6 perhaps, turned and went back at a great rate. He looked at the 4 behind him, and he looked at the 4 before him. They all returned his look. He resumed his way. The 4 in advance went on, constantly looking back. The 4 in the rear came closing up. When they all ranged out from the narrow track upon the open slope of the heath, and this order was maintained, let him diverge as he would to either side, there was no longer room to doubt that he was beset by these fellows. He stopped, as a last test, and they all stopped. "Why do you attend upon me in this way?" he asked the whole body. "Are you a pack of thieves?" "Don't answer him," said one of the number. He did not see which. "Better be quiet." "Better be quiet," repeated Neville. "Who said so?" Nobody replied. "It's good advice, whichever of you skulkers gave it," he went on angrily. "I will not submit to be penned in between 4 men there and 4 men there. I wish to pass, and I mean to pass, those 4 in front." They were all standing still, himself included. "If 8 men or 4 men or 2 men set upon one," he proceeded, growing more enraged, "the one has no chance but to set his mark upon some of them. And, by the Lord, I'll do it if I am interrupted any farther." Shouldering his heavy stick and quickening his pace, he shot on to pass the 4 ahead. The largest and strongest man of the number changed swiftly to the side on which he came up, and dexterously closed with him and went down with him, but not before the heavy stick had descended smartly. "Let him be," said this man in a suppressed voice, as they struggled together on the grass. "Fair play. His is the build of a girl to mine, and he's got a weight strapped to his back besides. Let him alone. I'll manage him." After a little rolling about, in a close scuffle which caused the faces of both to be besmeared with blood, the man took his knee from Neville's chest and rose, saying, "There. Now take him arm, in arm, any 2 of you." It was immediately done. "As to our being a pack of thieves, Mr. Landless," said the man, as he spat out some blood and wiped more from his face, "you know better than that at midday. We wouldn't have touched you if you hadn't forced us. We're going to take you round to the high road, anyhow, and you'll find help enough against thieves there if you want it. Wipe his face, somebody. See how it's a-trickling down him." When his face was cleansed, Neville recognised in the speaker Joe, driver of the Cloisterham omnibus, whom he had seen but once, and that on the day of his arrival. And what I recommend you for the present is, don't talk, Mr. Landless. You'll find a friend waiting for you at the high road, gone ahead by the other way when we split into two parties, and you had much better say nothing till you come up with him. Bring that stick along, somebody else, and let's be moving." Utterly bewildered, Neville stared around him and said not a word. Walking between his two conductors, who held his arms in theirs, he went on, as in a dream, until they came again into the high road and into the midst of a little group of people. The men who had turned back were among the group, and its central figures were Mr. Jasper and Mr. Crisparkle. Neville's conductors took him up to the Minor Canon, and there released him, as an act of deference to that gentleman. "What is all this, sir? What is the matter?" "I feel as if I had lost my senses," cried Neville, the group closing in around him. "Where is my nephew?" asked Mr. Jasper wildly. "Where is your nephew?" repeated Neville. "Why do you ask me?" "I ask you," retorted Jasper, "because you were the last person in his company, and he is not to be found." "Not to be found," cried Neville aghast. "Stay, stay," said Mr. Crisparkle. "Permit me, Jasper." "Mr. Neville, you are confounded. Collect your thoughts. It is of great importance that you should collect your thoughts. Attend to me." "I will try, sir, but I seem mad." "You left Mr. Jasper last night with Edwin Drood?" "Yes." "At what hour? Was it at 12 o'clock?" asked Neville, with his hand to his confused head and appealing to Jasper. "Quite right," said Mr. Crisparkle. "The hour Mr. Jasper has already named to me. You went down to the river together?" "Undoubtedly. To see the action of the wind there." "What followed? How long did you stay there?" "About 10 minutes. I should say not more." "We then walked together to your house, and he took leave of me at the door." "Did he say that he was going down to the river again?" "No. He said that he was going straight back." The bystanders looked at one another, and at Mr. Crisparkle, to whom Mr. Jasper, who had been intensely watching Neville, said in a low, distinct, suspicious voice, "What are those stains upon his dress?" All eyes were turned towards the blood upon his clothes. "And here are the same stains upon this stick," said Jasper, taking it from the hand of the man who held it. "I know the stick to be his, and he carried it last night. What does this mean?" "In the name of God, say what it means, Neville," urged Mr. Crisparkle. "That man and I," said Neville, pointing out his late adversary, "had a struggle for the stick just now, and you may see the same marks on him, sir. What was I to suppose when I found myself molested by 8 people? Could I dream of the true reason when they would give me none at all?" They admitted that they had thought it discreet to be silent, and that the struggle had taken place. And yet the very men who had seen it looked darkly at the smears which the bright cold air had already dried. "We must return, Neville," said Mr. Crisparkle. "Of course you will be glad to come back to clear yourself." "Of course, sir." "Mr. Landless will walk at my side," the Minor Canon continued, looking around him. "Come, Neville." They set forth on the walk back, and the others, with one exception, straggled after them at various distances. Jasper walked on the other side of Neville and never quitted that position. He was silent, while Mr. Crisparkle more than once repeated his former questions, and while Neville repeated his former answers, also while they both hazarded some explanatory conjectures. He was obstinately silent, because Mr. Crisparkle's manner directly appealed to him to take some part in the discussion, and no appeal would move his fixed face. When they drew near to the city, and it was suggested by the Minor Canon that they might do well in calling on the mayor at once, he assented with a stern nod, but he spake no word until they stood in Mr. Sapsey's parlour. Mr. Sapsey, being informed by Mr. Crisparkle of the circumstances under which they desired to make a voluntary statement before him, Mr. Jasper broke silence by declaring that he placed his whole reliance, humanly speaking, on Mr. Sapsey's penetration. There was no conceivable reason why his nephew should have suddenly absconded, unless Mr. Sapsey could suggest one, and then he would defer. There was no intelligible likelihood of his having returned to the river and been accidentally drowned in the dark, unless it should appear likely to Mr. Sapsey, and then again he would defer. He washed his hands as clean as he could of all horrible suspicions, unless it should appear to Mr. Sapsey that some such were inseparable from his last companion before his disappearance, not on good terms with previously, and then, once more, he would defer. His own state of mind, he being distracted with doubts and labouring under dismal apprehensions, was not to be safely trusted, but Mr. Sapsey's was. Mr. Sapsey expressed his opinion that the case had a dark look, in short, and here his eyes rested full on Neville's countenance, an un-English complexion. Having made this grand point, he wandered into a denser haze and maze of nonsense than even a mayor might have been expected to disport himself in, and came out of it with the brilliant discovery that to take the life of a fellow creature was to take something that didn't belong to you. He wavered whether or no he should at once issue his warrant for the committal of Neville Landless to jail under circumstances of grave suspicion, and he might have gone so far as to do it but for the indignant protest of the minor canon, who undertook for the young man's remaining in his own house, and being produced by his own hands whenever demanded. Mr. Jasper then understood Mr. Sapsea to suggest that the river should be dragged, that its banks should be rigidly examined, that particulars of the disappearance should be sent to all outlying places and to London, and that placards and advertisements should be widely circulated imploring Edwin Drood, if for any unknown reason he had withdrawn himself from his uncle's home and society, to take pity on that loving kinsman's sore bereavement and distress, and somehow inform him that he was yet alive. Mr. Sapsea was perfectly understood, for this was exactly his meaning, though he had said nothing about it, and measures were taken towards all these ends immediately. It would be difficult to determine which was the more oppressed with horror and amazement, Neville Landless or John Jasper. But that Jasper's position forced him to be active, while Neville's forced him to be passive. There would have been nothing to choose between them. Each was bowed down and broken. With the earliest light of the next morning, men were at work upon the river, and other men, most of whom volunteered for the service, were examining the banks. All the livelong day the search went on, upon the river, with barge and pole, and drag and net, upon the muddy and rushy shore, with jack-boots, hatchet, spade, rope, dogs, and all imaginable appliances. Even at night, the river was specked with lanterns, and lurid with fires. Far-off creeks, into which the tide washed as it changed, had their knots of watchers, listening to the lapping of the stream, and looking out for any burden it might bear. Remote shingly causeways near the sea, and lonely points off which there was a race of water, had their unwonted flaring cressets and rough-coated figures when the next day dawned. But no trace of Edwin Drood revisited the light of the sun. All that day, again, the search went on. Now in barge and boat, and now ashore among the osiers, or tramping amidst mud and stakes and jagged stones in low-lying places, where solitary watermarks and signals of strange shapes showed like spectres, John Jasper worked and toiled. But to no purpose, for still no trace of Edwin Drood revisited the light of the sun. Setting his watches for that night again, so that vigilant eyes should be kept on every change of tide, he went home exhausted. Unkempt and disordered, bedaubed with mud that had dried upon him, and with much of his clothing torn to rags, he had but just dropped into his easy-chair, when Mr. Grewgious stood before him. "This is strange news," said Mr. Grewgious. "Strange and fearful news." Jasper had merely lifted up his heavy eyes to say it, and now dropped them again as he drooped, worn out, over one side of his easy-chair. Mr. Grewgious smoothed his head and face, and stood looking at the fire. "How is your ward?" asked Jasper, after a time, in a faint, fatigued voice. "Poor little thing, you may imagine her condition." "Have you seen his sister?" inquired Jasper, as before. "Whose?" The curtness of the counter-question, and the cool, slow manner in which, as he put it, Mr. Grewgious moved his eyes from the fire to his companion's face, might at any other time have been exasperating. In his depression and exhaustion, Jasper merely opened his eyes to say, "The suspected young man's." "Do you suspect him?" asked Mr. Grewgious. "I don't know what to think. I cannot make up my mind." "Nor I," said Mr. Grewgious. "But as you spoke of him as the suspected young man, I thought you had made up your mind. I have just left Miss Landless." "What is her state?" "Defiance of all suspicion, and unbounded faith in her brother." "Poor thing. However," pursued Mr. Grewgious, "it is not of her that I came to speak. It is of my ward. I have a communication to make that will surprise you. At least, it has surprised me." Jasper, with a groaning sigh, turned wearily in his chair. "Shall I put it off till tomorrow?" said Mr. Grewgious. "Mind, I warn you, that I think it will surprise you." More attention and concentration came into John Jasper's eyes as they caught sight of Mr. Grewgious smoothing his head again, and again looking at the fire, but now with a compressed and determined mouth. "What is it?" demanded Jasper, becoming upright in his chair. "To be sure," said Mr. Grewgious, provokingly slowly and internally, as he kept his eyes on the fire. "I might have known it sooner. She gave me the opening, but I am such an exceedingly angular man that it never occurred to me. I took all for granted." "What is it?" demanded Jasper once more. Mr. Grewgious, alternately opening and shutting the palms of his hands as he warmed them at the fire, and looking fixedly at him sideways, and never changing either his action or his look in all that followed, went on to reply. This young couple, the lost youth and Miss Rosa, my ward, though so long betrothed, and so long recognizing their betrothal, and so near being married. Mr. Grewgious saw a staring white face and 2 quivering white lips in the easy-chair, and saw 2 muddy hands gripping its sides. But for the hands, he might have thought he had never seen the face. This young couple came gradually to the discovery, made on both sides pretty equally, I think, that they would be happier and better, both in their present and their future lives, as affectionate friends, or say rather as brother and sister, than as husband and wife. Mr. Grewgious saw a lead-coloured face in the easy-chair, and on its surface dreadful starting drops or bubbles, as if of steel. This young couple formed at length the healthy resolution of interchanging their discoveries, openly, sensibly, and tenderly. They met for that purpose. After some innocent and generous talk, they agreed to dissolve their existing, and their intended, relations for ever and ever. Mr. Grewgious saw a ghastly figure rise open-mouthed from the easy-chair and lift its outspread hands towards its head. One of this young couple, and that one your nephew, fearful, however, that in the tenderness of your affection for him you would be bitterly disappointed by so wide a departure from his projected life, forbore to tell you the secret for a few days, and left it to be disclosed by me, when I should come down to speak to you, and he would be gone. I speak to you, and he is gone. Mr. Grewgious saw the ghastly figure throw back its head, clutch its hair with its hands, and turn with a writhing action from him. I have now said all I have to say, except that this young couple parted, firmly, though not without tears and sorrow, on the evening when you last saw them together. Mr. Grewgious heard a terrible shriek, and saw no ghastly figure, sitting or standing, saw nothing but a heap of torn and miry clothes upon the floor. Not changing his action even then, he opened and shut the palms of his hands as he warmed them, and looked down at it. Chapter 16. Devoted. When John Jasper recovered from his fit or swoon, he found himself being tended by Mr. and Mrs. Tope, whom his visitor had summoned for the purpose. His visitor, wooden of aspect, sat stiffly in a chair, with his hands upon his knees, watching his recovery. "There! You've come to nicely now, sir," said the tearful Mrs. Tope. "You were thoroughly worn out, and no wonder." "A man," said Mr. Grewgious, with his usual air of repeating a lesson, "cannot have his rest broken, and his mind cruelly tormented, and his body overtaxed by fatigue without being thoroughly worn out." "I fear I have alarmed you," Jasper apologized faintly when he was helped into his easy-chair. "Not at all, I thank you," answered Mr. Grewgious. "You are too considerate." "Not at all, I thank you," answered Mr. Grewgious again. "You must take some wine, sir," said Mrs. Tope, "and the jelly that I had ready for you, and that you wouldn't put your lips to at noon, though I warned you what would come of it, you know, and you not breakfasted, and you must have a wing of the roast fowl that has been put back 20 times if it's been put back once. It shall all be on table in 5 minutes, and this good gentleman belike will stop and see you take it." This good gentleman replied with a snort, which might mean yes or no, or anything or nothing, and which Mrs. Tope would have found highly mystifying, but that her attention was divided by the service of the table. "You will take something with me," said Jasper, as the cloth was laid. "I couldn't get a morsel down my throat, I thank you," answered Mr. Grewgious. Jasper both ate and drank almost voraciously. Combined with the hurry in his mode of doing it, was an evident indifference to the taste of what he took, suggesting that he ate and drank to fortify himself against any other failure of the spirits, far more than to gratify his palate. Mr. Grewgious in the meantime sat upright, with no expression in his face, and a hard kind of imperturbably polite protest all over him, as though he would have said, in reply to some invitation to discourse, "I couldn't originate the faintest approach to an observation on any subject whatever, I thank you." "Do you know," said Jasper, when he had pushed away his plate and glass, and had sat meditating for a few minutes, "do you know that I find some crumbs of comfort in the communication with which you have so much amazed me?" "Do you?" returned Mr. Grewgious, pretty plainly adding the unspoken clause, "I don't, I thank you," after recovering from the shock of a piece of news of my dear boy. So entirely unexpected, and so destructive of all the castles I had built for him, and after having had time to think of it, yes. "I shall be glad to pick up your crumbs," said Mr. Grewgious dryly. "Is there not, or is there? If I deceive myself, tell me so, and shorten my pain. Is there not, Or is there hope that, finding himself in this new position and becoming sensitively alive to the awkward burden of explanation in this quarter and that and the other with which it would load him, he avoided the awkwardness and took to flight? Such a thing might be, said Mr. Grewgious, pondering. Such a thing has been. I have read of cases in which people, rather than face a 7 days' wonder and have to account for themselves to the idle and impertinent, have taken themselves away and been long unheard of. I believe such things have happened, said Mr. Grewgious, pondering still. When I had, and could have, no suspicion, pursued Jasper, eagerly following the new track, that the dear lost boy had withheld anything from me, most of all, such a leading matter as this, what gleam of light was there for me in the whole black sky? When I supposed that his intended wife was here, and his marriage close at hand, how could I entertain the possibility of his voluntarily leaving this place, in a manner that would be so unaccountable, capricious, and cruel? But now that I know what you have told me, is there no little chink through which day pierces? Supposing him to have disappeared of his own act, is not his disappearance more accountable and less cruel? The fact of his having just parted from your ward is in itself a sort of reason for his going away. It does not make his mysterious departure the less cruel to me, it is true, but it relieves it of cruelty to her. Mr. Grewgious could not but assent to this. And even as to me, continued Jasper, still pursuing the new track with ardour and, as he did so, brightening with hope, he knew that you were coming to me. He knew that you were entrusted to tell me what you have told me. If your doing so has awakened a new train of thought in my perplexed mind, it reasonably follows that, from the same premises, he might have foreseen the inferences that I should draw. Grant that he did foresee them, and even the cruelty to me, and who am I? John Jasper, music-master, vanishes. Once more, Mr. Grewgious could not but assent to this. I have had my distrusts, and terrible distrusts they have been, said Jasper. But your disclosure, overpowering as it was at first, showing me that my own dear boy had had a great disappointing reservation from me, who so fondly loved him, kindles hope within me. You do not extinguish it when I state it, but admit it to be a reasonable hope. I begin to believe it possible, here he clasped his hands, that he may have disappeared from among us of his own accord, and that he may yet be alive and well. Mr. Crisparkle came in at the moment, to whom Mr. Jasper repeated, I begin to believe it possible that he may have disappeared of his own accord, and may yet be alive and well. Mr. Crisparkle taking a seat and inquiring, Why so? Mr. Jasper repeated the arguments he had just set forth. If they had been less plausible than they were, the good minor canon's mind would have been in a state of preparation to receive them as exculpatory of his unfortunate pupil. But he too did really attach great importance to the lost young man's having been, so immediately before his disappearance, placed in a new and embarrassing relation towards everyone acquainted with his projects and affairs, and the fact seemed to him to present the question in a new light. I stated to Mr. Sapsea, when we waited on him, said Jasper, as he really had done, that there was no quarrel or difference between the two young men at their last meeting. We all know that their first meeting was unfortunately very far from amicable, but all went smoothly and quietly when they were last together at my house. My dear boy was not in his usual spirits, he was depressed, I noticed that, and I am bound henceforth to dwell upon the circumstance the more, now that I know there was a special reason for his being depressed, a reason, moreover, which may possibly have induced him to absent himself. I pray to heaven it may turn out so, exclaimed Mr. Crisparkle. I pray to heaven it may turn out so, repeated Jasper. You know, and Mr. Grewgious should now know likewise, that I took a great prepossession against Mr. Neville Landless, arising out of his furious conduct on that first occasion. You know that I came to you, extremely apprehensive, on my dear boy's behalf, of his mad violence. You know that I even entered in my diary, and showed the entry to you, that I had dark forebodings against him. Mr. Grewgious ought to be possessed of the whole case. He shall not, through any suppression of mine, be informed of a part of it, and kept in ignorance of another part of it. I wish him to be good enough to understand that the communication he has made to me has hopefully influenced my mind, in spite of its having been, before this mysterious occurrence took place, profoundly impressed against young Landless. This fairness troubled the minor canon much. He felt that he was not as open in his own dealing. He charged against himself reproachfully that he had suppressed, so far, the 2 points of a second strong outbreak of temper against Edwin Drood on the part of Neville, and of the passion of jealousy having, to his own certain knowledge, flamed up in Neville's breast against him. He was convinced of Neville's innocence of any part in the ugly disappearance, and yet so many little circumstances combined so woefully against him that he dreaded to add two more to their cumulative weight. He was among the truest of men, but he had been balancing in his mind, much to its distress, whether his volunteering to tell these two fragments of truth at this time would not be tantamount to a piecing together of falsehood in the place of truth. However, here was a model before him. He hesitated no longer. Addressing Mr. Grewgious, as one placed in authority by the revelation he had brought to bear on the mystery, and surpassing the angular Mr. Grewgious became when he found himself in that unexpected position, Mr. Crisparkle bore his testimony to Mr. Jasper's strict sense of justice, and, expressing his absolute confidence in the complete clearance of his pupil from the least taint of suspicion, sooner or later, avowed that his confidence in that young gentleman had been formed, in spite of his confidential knowledge that his temper was of the hottest and fiercest, and that it was directly incensed against Mr. Jasper's nephew by the circumstance of his romantically supposing himself to be enamoured of the same young lady. The sanguine reaction manifest in Mr. Jasper was proof even against this unlooked-for declaration. It turned him paler, but he repeated that he would cling to the hope he had derived from Mr. Grewgious, and that if no trace of his dear boy were found, leading to the dreadful inference that he had been made away with, he would cherish unto the last stretch of possibility the idea that he might have absconded of his own wild will. Now, it fell out that Mr. Crisparkle, going away from this conference still very uneasy in his mind, and very much troubled on behalf of the young man whom he held as a kind of prisoner in his own house, took a memorable night walk. He walked to Cloisterham Weir. He often did so, and consequently there was nothing remarkable in his footsteps tending that way. But the preoccupation of his mind so hindered him from planning any walk or taking heed of the objects he passed, that his first consciousness of being near the weir was derived from the sound of the falling water close at hand. "How did I come here?" was his first thought as he stopped. "Why did I come here?" was his second. Then he stood intently listening to the water, a familiar passage in his reading about airy tongues that syllable men's names rose so unbidden to his ear that he put it from him with his hand as if it were tangible. It was starlight. The weir was full 2 miles above the spot to which the young men had repaired to watch the storm. No search had been made up here, for the tide had been running strongly down at that time of the night of Christmas Eve, and the likeliest places for the discovery of a body, if a fatal accident had happened under such circumstances, all lay both when the tide ebbed and when it flowed again, between that spot and the sea. The water came over the weir with its usual sound on a cold starlight night, and little could be seen of it, yet Mr. Crisparkle had a strange idea that something unusual hung about the place. He reasoned with himself. What was it? Where was it? Put it to the proof. Which sense did it address? No sense reported anything unusual there. He listened again, and his sense of hearing again checked the water coming over the weir with its usual sound on a cold starlight night. Knowing very well that the mystery with which his mind was occupied might of itself give the place this haunted air, he strained those hawk's eyes of his for the correction of his sight. He got closer to the weir and peered at its well-known posts and timbers. Nothing in the least unusual was remotely shadowed forth, but he resolved that he would come back early in the morning. The weir ran through his broken sleep all night, and he was back again at sunrise. It was a bright, frosty morning. The whole composition before him, when he stood where he had stood last night, was clearly discernible in its minutest details. He had surveyed it closely for some minutes, and was about to withdraw his eyes, when they were attracted keenly to one spot. He turned his back upon the weir, and looked far away at the sky, and at the earth, and then looked again at that one spot. It caught his sight again immediately, and he concentrated his vision upon it. He could not lose it now, though it was but such a speck in the landscape. It fascinated his sight. His hands began plucking off his coat, for it struck him that, at that spot, a corner of the weir, something glistened, which did not move and come over with the glistening water drops, but remained stationary. He assured himself of this, he threw off his clothes, he plunged into the icy water, and swam for the spot. Climbing the timbers, he took from them, caught among their interstices by its chain, a gold watch, bearing engraved upon its back. Edie brought the watch to the bank, swam to the weir again, climbed it, and dived off. He knew every hole and corner of all the depths, and dived and dived and dived, until he could bear the cold no more. His notion was that he would find the body. He only found a shirt-pin sticking in some mud and ooze. With these discoveries he returned to Cloisterham, and, taking Neville Landless with him, went straight to the mayor. Mr. Jasper was sent for, the watch and shirt-pin were identified, Neville was detained, and the wildest frenzy and fatuity of evil report rose against him. He was of that vindictive and violent nature, that but for his poor sister, who alone had influence over him, and out of whose sight he was never to be trusted, he would be in the daily commission of murder. Before coming to England he had caused to be whipped to death sundry natives, nomadic persons, encamping now in Asia, now in Africa, now in the West Indies, and now at the North Pole, vaguely supposed in Cloisterham to be always black, always of great virtue, always calling themselves me, and everybody else Massa or Missy, according to sex, and always reading tracts of the obscurest meaning, in broken English, but always accurately understanding them in the purest mother tongue. He had nearly brought Mrs. Crisparkle's grey hairs with sorrow to the grave. Those original expressions were Mr. Sapsea's. He had repeatedly said he would have Mr. Crisparkle's life. He had repeatedly said he would have everybody's life and become in effect the last man. He had been brought down to Cloisterham from London by an eminent philanthropist, and why? Because that philanthropist had expressly declared, "I owe it to my fellow creatures that he should be, in the words of Bentham, where he is the cause of the greatest danger to the smallest number." These dropping shots from the blunderbusses of blunderheadedness might not have hit him in a vital place. But he had to stand against a trained and well-directed fire of arms of precision too. He had notoriously threatened the lost young man, and had, according to the showing of his own faithful friend and tutor who strove so hard for him, a cause of bitter animosity, created by himself and stated by himself, against that ill-starred fellow. He had armed himself with an offensive weapon for the fatal night, and he had gone off early in the morning after making preparations for departure. He had been found with traces of blood on him. Truly, they might have been wholly caused as he represented, but they might not also. On a search warrant being issued for the examination of his room, clothes, and so forth, it was discovered that he had destroyed all his papers and rearranged all his possessions on the very afternoon of the disappearance. A watch found at the weir was challenged by the jeweller as one he had wound and set for Edwin Drood at 20 minutes past 2 on that same afternoon, and it had run down before being cast into the water, and it was the jeweller's positive opinion that it had never been rewound. This would justify the hypothesis that the watch was taken from him not long after he left Mr. Jasper's house at midnight, in company with the last person seen with him, and that it had been thrown away after being retained some hours. Why thrown away? If he had been murdered, and so artfully disfigured, or concealed, or both, as that the murderer hoped identification to be impossible, except from something that he wore, assuredly the murderer would seek to remove from the body the most lasting, the best known, and the most easily recognizable things upon it. Those things would be the watch and shirt-pin. As to his opportunities of casting them into the river, if he were the object of these suspicions, they were easy. For he had been seen by many persons, wandering about on that side of the city, indeed on all sides of it, in a miserable and seemingly half-distracted manner. As to the choice of the spot, obviously such criminating evidence had better take its chance of being found anywhere, rather than upon himself or in his possession. Concerning the reconciliatory nature of the appointed meeting between the two young men, very little could be made of that in young Landless's favour, for it distinctly appeared that the meeting originated, not with him, but with Mr. Crisparkle, and that it had been urged on by Mr. Crisparkle, and who could say how unwillingly, or in what ill-conditioned mood, his enforced pupil had gone to it. The more his case was looked into, the weaker it became in every point. Even the broad suggestion that the lost young man had absconded was rendered additionally improbable on the showing of the young lady from whom he had so lately parted, for what did she say, with great earnestness and sorrow, when interrogated? That he had expressly and enthusiastically planned with her, that he would await the arrival of her guardian, Mr. Grewgious, and yet, be it observed, he disappeared before that gentleman appeared. On the suspicions thus urged and supported, Neville was detained and redetained, and the search was pressed on every hand, and Jasper laboured night and day. But nothing more was found. No discovery being made, which proved the lost man to be dead, it at length became necessary to release the person suspected of having made away with him. Neville was set at large. Then a consequence ensued which Mr. Crisparkle had too well foreseen. Neville must leave the place, for the place shunned him and cast him out. Even had it not been so, The dear old China shepherdess would have worried herself to death with fears for her son and with general trepidation occasioned by their having such an inmate. Even had that not been so, the authority to which the minor canon deferred officially would have settled the point. "Mr. Crisparkle," quoth the Dean, "human justice may err, but it must act according to its lights. The days of taking sanctuary are past. This young man must not take sanctuary with us." "You mean that he must leave my house, sir?" "Mr. Crisparkle," returned the prudent Dean, "I claim no authority in your house. I merely confer with you on the painful necessity you find yourself under of depriving this young man of the great advantages of your counsel and instruction." "It is very lamentable, sir," Mr. Crisparkle represented. "Very much so," the Dean assented. "And if it be a necessity," Mr. Crisparkle faltered. "As you unfortunately find it to be," returned the Dean. Mr. Crisparkle bowed submissively. "It is hard to prejudge his case, sir, but I am sensible that—" "Just so, perfectly. As you say, Mr. Crisparkle," interposed the Dean, nodding his head smoothly, "there is nothing else to be done. No doubt, no doubt. There is no alternative, as your good sense has discovered. I am entirely satisfied of his perfect innocence, sir, nevertheless." "Well," said the Dean, in a more confidential tone, and slightly glancing around him, "I would not say so generally. Not generally. Enough of suspicion attaches to him to— No, I think I would not say so generally." Mr. Crisparkle bowed again. "It does not become us, perhaps," pursued the Dean, "to be partisans, not partisans. We clergy keep our hearts warm and our heads cool, and we hold a judicious middle course." "I hope you do not object, sir, to my having stated in public emphatically that he will reappear here whenever any new suspicion may be awakened or any new circumstance may come to light in this extraordinary matter." "Not at all," returned the Dean. "And yet, do you know, I don't think," with a very nice and neat emphasis on those two words, "I don't think I would state it emphatically. State it, yes, but emphatically, no, I think not. In point of fact, Mr. Crisparkle, keeping our hearts warm and our heads cool, we clergy need do nothing emphatically." So minor Canon Rowe knew Neville Landless no more, and he went whithersoever he would or could with a blight upon his name and fame. It was not until then that John Jasper silently resumed his place in the choir. Haggard and red-eyed, his hopes plainly had deserted him, his sanguine mood was gone, and all his worst misgivings had come back. A day or two afterwards, while unrobing, he took his diary from a pocket of his coat, turned the leaves, and with an impressive look, and without one spoken word, handed this entry to Mr. Crisparkle to read. "My dear boy is murdered. The discovery of the watch and shirt-pin convinces me that he was murdered that night, and that his jewellery was taken from him to prevent identification by its means. All the delusive hopes I had founded on his separation from his betrothed wife, I give to the winds. They perish before this fatal discovery. I now swear, and record the oath on this page, that I never more will discuss this mystery with any human creature until I hold the clue to it in my hand. That I never will relax in my secrecy or in my search. That I will fasten the crime of the murder of my dear dead boy upon the murderer, and that I devote myself to his destruction." Chapter 17. Philanthropy, professional and unprofessional. Full half a year had come and gone, and Mr. Crisparkle sat in a waiting room in the London chief offices of the Haven of Philanthropy until he could have audience of Mr. Honeythunder. In his college days of athletic exercises, Mr. Crisparkle had known professors of the noble art of fisticuffs, and had attended 2 or 3 of their gloved gatherings. He had now an opportunity of observing that as to the phrenological formation of the backs of their heads, the professing philanthropists were uncommonly like the pugilists. In the development of all those organs which constitute or attend a propensity to pitch into your fellow creatures, the philanthropists were remarkably favoured. There were several professors passing in and out, with exactly the aggressive air upon them of being ready for a turn-up with any novice who might happen to be on hand, that Mr. Crisparkle well remembered in the circles of the fancy. Preparations were in progress for a moral little mill somewhere on the rural circuit, and other professors were backing this or that heavy weight as good for such or such speech, making hits, so very much after the manner of the sporting publicans that the intended resolutions might have been rounds. In an official manager of these displays, much celebrated for his platform tactics, Mr. Crisparkle recognised, in a suit of black, the counterpart of a deceased benefactor of his species, an eminent public character, once known to fame as Frosty-Faced Fogo, who in days of yore superintended the formation of the magic circle with the ropes and stakes. There were only 3 conditions of resemblance wanting between these professors and those. Firstly, the philanthropists were in very bad training, much too fleshy, and presenting, both in face and figure, a superabundance of what is known to pugilistic experts as suet pudding. Secondly, the philanthropists had not the good temper of the pugilists, and used worse language. Thirdly, their fighting code stood in great need of revision, as empowering them not only to bore their man to the ropes, but to bore him to the confines of distraction. Also to hit him when he was down, hit him anywhere and anyhow, kick him, stamp upon him, gouge him, and maul him behind his back without mercy. In these last particulars, the professors of the noble art were much nobler than the professors of philanthropy. Mr. Crisparkle was so completely lost in musing on these similarities and dissimilarities, at the same time watching the crowd which came and went by, always, as it seemed, on errands of antagonistically snatching something from somebody, and never giving anything to anybody, that his name was called before he heard it. On his at length responding, he was shown by a miserably shabby and underpaid stipendiary philanthropist, who could hardly have done worse if he had taken service with a declared enemy of the human race, to Mr. Honeythunder's room. "Sir," said Mr. Honeythunder, in his tremendous voice, like a schoolmaster issuing orders to a boy of whom he had a bad opinion, "sit down." Mr. Crisparkle seated himself. Mr. Honeythunder, having signed the remaining few score of a few thousand circulars, calling upon a corresponding number of families without means to come forward, stump up instantly and be philanthropists, or go to the devil. Another shabby stipendiary philanthropist, highly disinterested if in earnest, gathered these into a basket and walked off with them. "Now, Mr. Crisparkle," said Mr. Honeythunder, turning his chair half round towards him when they were alone, and squaring his arms with his hands on his knees and his brows knitted, as if he added, "I am going to make short work of you. Now, Mr. Crisparkle, we entertain different views, you and I, sir, of the sanctity of human life." "Do we?" returned the Minor Canon. "We do, sir. Might I ask you," said the Minor Canon, "what are your views on that subject?" "That human life is a thing to be held sacred, sir." "Might I ask you," pursued the Minor Canon as before, "what you suppose to be my views on that subject?" "By George, sir," returned the philanthropist, squaring his arms still more, as he frowned on Mr. Crisparkle, "they are best known to yourself." "Readily admitted." "But you began by saying that we took different views, you know. Therefore, or you could not say so, you must have set up some views as mine. Pray, what views have you set up as mine?" "Here is a man, and a young man," said Mr. Honeythunder, as if that made the matter infinitely worse, and he could have easily borne the loss of an old one, "swept off the face of the earth by a deed of violence. What do you call that?" "Murder," said the Minor Canon. "What do you call the doer of that deed, sir?" "A murderer," said the Minor Canon. "I am glad to hear you admit so much, sir," retorted Mr. Honeythunder, in his most offensive manner, "and I candidly tell you that I didn't expect it." Here he lowered heavily at Mr. Crisparkle again. "Be so good as to explain what you mean by those very unjustifiable expressions." "I don't sit here, sir," returned the philanthropist, raising his voice to a roar, "to be browbeaten." "As the only other person present, no one can possibly know that better than I do," returned the Minor Canon very quietly. "But I interrupt your explanation." "Murder," proceeded Mr. Honeythunder, in a kind of boisterous reverie, with his platform folding of his arms, and his platform nod of abhorrent reflection after each short sentiment of a word. "Bloodshed, Abel, Cain. I hold no terms with Cain. I repudiate with a shudder the red hand when it is offered me, instead of instantly leaping into his chair and cheering himself hoarse, as the brotherhood in public meeting assembled would infallibly have done on this cue. Mr. Crisparkle merely reversed the quiet crossing of his legs, and said mildly, "Don't let me interrupt your explanation when you begin it. The commandments say, no murder." "N.O. murder, sir," proceeded Mr. Honeythunder, platformally pausing, as if he took Mr. Crisparkle to task for having distinctly asserted that they said, "You may do a little murder, and then leave off." "And they also say, you shall bear no false witness," observed Mr. Crisparkle. "Enough," bellowed Mr. Honeythunder, with a solemnity and severity that would have brought the house down at a meeting. "Enough. My late wards being now of age, and I being released from a trust which I cannot contemplate without a thrill of horror, there are the accounts which you have undertaken to accept on their behalf, and there is a statement of the balance which you have undertaken to receive, and which you cannot receive too soon. And let me tell you, sir, I wish that, as a man and a Minor Canon, you were better employed," with a nod. Matter employed, with another nod. Matter employed, with another, and the 3 nods added up. Mr. Crisparkle rose, a little heated in the face, but with perfect command of himself. Mr. Honeythunder, he said, taking up the papers referred to, my being better or worse employed than I am at present is a matter of taste and opinion. You might think me better employed in enrolling myself a member of your society. Indeed, sir, retorted Mr. Honeythunder, shaking his head in a threatening manner. It would have been better for you if you had done that long ago. I think otherwise. Or, said Mr. Honeythunder, shaking his head again, I might think one of your profession better employed in devoting himself to the discovery and punishment of guilt than in leaving that duty to be undertaken by a layman. I may regard my profession from a point of view which teaches me that its first duty is towards those who are in necessity and tribulation, who are desolate and oppressed, said Mr. Crisparkle. However, as I have quite clearly satisfied myself that it is no part of my profession to make professions, I say no more of that. But I owe it to Mr. Neville, and to Mr. Neville's sister, and in a much lower degree to myself, to say to you that I know I was in the full possession and understanding of Mr. Neville's mind and heart at the time of this occurrence, and that, without in the least colouring or concealing what was to be deplored in him, and required to be corrected, I feel certain that his tale is true. Feeling that certainty, I befriend him. As long as that certainty shall last, I will befriend him. And if any consideration could shake me in this resolve, I should be so ashamed of myself for my meanness that no man's good opinion, no, nor no woman's, so gained, could compensate me for the loss of my own. Good fellow. Manly fellow. And he was so modest too. There was no more self-assertion in the minor canon than in the schoolboy who had stood in the breezy playing fields keeping a wicket. He was simply and staunchly true to his duty alike in the large case and in the small. So all true souls ever are. So every true soul ever was, ever is, and ever will be. There is nothing little to the really great in spirit. Then who do you make out did the deed? Asked Mr. Honeythunder, turning on him abruptly. Heaven forbid, said Mr. Crisparkle, that in my desire to clear one man I should lightly criminate another. I accuse no one. Tchah! Ejaculated Mr. Honeythunder with great disgust, for this was by no means the principle on which the philanthropic brotherhood usually proceeded. And, sir, you are not a disinterested witness, we must bear in mind. How am I an interested one? Inquired Mr. Crisparkle, smiling innocently, at a loss to imagine. There was a certain stipend, sir, paid to you for your pupil, which may have warped your judgment a bit, said Mr. Honeythunder coarsely. Perhaps I expect to retain it still, Mr. Crisparkle returned, enlightened. Do you mean that too? Well, sir, returned the professional philanthropist, getting up and thrusting his hands down into his trousers pockets, I don't go about measuring people for caps. If people find I have any about me that fit 'em, they can put 'em on and wear 'em, if they like. That's their lookout, not mine. Mr. Crisparkle eyed him with a just indignation, and took him to task thus. Mr. Honeythunder, I hoped when I came in here that I might be under no necessity of commenting on the introduction of platform manners or platform manoeuvres among the decent forbearances of private life. But you have given me such a specimen of both that I should be a fit subject for both if I remain silent respecting them. They are detestable. They don't suit you, I dare say, sir. They are, repeated Mr. Crisparkle, without noticing the interruption. Detestable. They violate equally the justice that should belong to Christians and the restraints that should belong to gentlemen. You assume a great crime to have been committed by one whom I, acquainted with the attendant circumstances, and having numerous reasons on my side, devoutly believe to be innocent of it. Because I differ from you on that vital point, what is your platform resource? Instantly to turn upon me, charging that I have no sense of the enormity of the crime itself, but am its aider and abettor. So, another time, taking me as representing your opponent in other cases, you set up a platform credulity, a moved and seconded and carried, unanimously profession of faith in some ridiculous delusion or mischievous imposition. I decline to believe it, and you fall back upon your platform resource of proclaiming that I believe nothing, that because I will not bow down to a false god of your making, I deny the true God. Another time you make the platform discovery that war is a calamity, and you propose to abolish it by a string of twisted resolutions tossed into the air like the tail of a kite. I do not admit the discovery to be yours in the least, and I have not a grain of faith in your remedy. Again, your platform resource of representing me as revelling in the horrors of a battlefield like a fiend incarnate. Another time, in another of your undiscriminating platform rushes, you would punish the sober for the drunken. I claim consideration for the comfort, convenience, and refreshment of the sober, and you presently make platform proclamation that I have a depraved desire to turn heaven's creatures into swine and wild beasts. In all such cases, your movers, and your seconders, and your supporters, your regular professors of all degrees, run amok like so many mad Malays, habitually attributing the lowest and basest motives with the utmost recklessness. Let me call your attention to a recent instance in yourself for which you should blush, and quoting figures which you know to be as wilfully one-sided as a statement of any complicated account that should be all creditor side and no debtor, or all debtor side and no creditor. Therefore it is, Mr. Honeythunder, that I consider the platform a sufficiently bad example and a sufficiently bad school, even in public life. But hold that, carried into private life, it becomes an unendurable nuisance. "These are strong words, sir," exclaimed the philanthropist. "I hope so," said Mr. Crisparkle. "Good morning." He walked out of the haven at a great rate, but soon fell into his regular brisk pace, and soon had a smile upon his face as he went along, wondering what the China shepherdess would have said if she had seen him pounding Mr. Honeythunder in the late little lively affair. For Mr. Crisparkle had just enough of harmless vanity to hope that he had hit hard, and to glow with the belief that he had trimmed the philanthropic jacket pretty handsomely. He took himself to Staple Inn, but not to P.J. and Mr. Grewgious. Full many a creaking stair he climbed before he reached some attic rooms in a corner, turned the latch of their unbolted door, and stood beside the table of Neville Landless. An air of retreat and solitude hung about the rooms and about their inhabitant. He was much worn, and so were they. Their sloping ceilings, cumbrous rusty locks and grates, and heavy wooden bins and beams, slowly mouldering withal, had a prisoner's look, and he had the haggard face of a prisoner. Yet the sunlight shone in at the ugly garret window, which had a penthouse to itself thrust out among the tiles, and on the cracked and smoke-blackened parapet beyond. Some of the deluded sparrows of the place rheumatically hopped, like little feathered cripples who had left their crutches in their nests, and there was a play of living leaves at hand that changed the air, and made an imperfect sort of music in it that would have been melody in the country. The rooms were sparely furnished, but with good store of books. Everything expressed the abode of a poor student. That Mr. Crisparkle had been either chooser, lender, or donor of the books, or that he combined the three characters, might have been easily seen in the friendly beam of his eyes upon them as he entered. "How goes it, Neville?" "I am in good heart, Mr. Crisparkle, and working away." "I wish your eyes were not quite so large and not quite so bright," said the Minor Canon, slowly releasing the hand he had taken in his. "They brighten at the sight of you," returned Neville. "If you were to fall away from me, they would soon be dull enough." "Rally, rally," urged the other in a stimulating tone. "Fight for it, Neville. If I were dying, I feel as if a word from you would rally me. If my pulse had stopped, I feel as if your touch would make it beat again," said Neville. "But I have rallied and am doing famously." Mr. Crisparkle turned him with his face a little more towards the light. "I want to see a ruddier touch here, Neville," he said, indicating his own healthy cheek by way of pattern. "I want more sun to shine upon you." Neville drooped suddenly, as he replied in a lowered voice, "I am not hardy enough for that yet. I may become so, but I cannot bear it yet. If you had gone through those Cloisterham streets as I did, if you had seen, as I did, those averted eyes, and the better sort of people silently giving me too much room to pass, that I might not touch them or come near them, you wouldn't think it quite unreasonable that I cannot go about in the daylight." "My poor fellow," said the Minor Canon, in a tone so purely sympathetic that the young man caught his hand. "I never said it was unreasonable, never thought so. But I should like you to do it. And that would give me the strongest motive to do it. But I cannot yet. I cannot persuade myself that the eyes of even the stream of strangers I pass in this vast city look at me without suspicion. I feel marked and tainted even when I go out, as I do only at night. But the darkness covers me then, and I take courage from it." Mr. Crisparkle laid a hand upon his shoulder and stood looking down at him. "If I could have changed my name," said Neville, "I would have done so. But as you wisely pointed out to me, I can't do that, for it would look like guilt. If I could have gone to some distant place, I might have found relief in that, but the thing is not to be thought of for the same reason. Hiding and escaping would be the construction in either case. It seems a little hard to be so tied to a stake and innocent, but I don't complain." "And you must expect no miracle to help you, Neville," said Mr. Crisparkle compassionately. "No, sir, I know that. The ordinary fullness of time and circumstances is all I have to trust to. It will right you at last, Neville. So I believe, and I hope I may live to know it." But perceiving that the despondent mood into which he was falling cast a shadow on the minor canon, and, it may be, feeling that the broad hand upon his shoulder was not then quite as steady as its own natural strength had rendered it when it first touched him just now, he brightened and said, "Excellent circumstances for study, anyhow. And you know, Mr. Crisparkle, what need I have of study in all ways? Not to mention that you've advised me to study for the difficult profession of the law, specially, and that of course I am guiding myself by the advice of such a friend and helper. Such a good friend and helper." He took the fortifying hand from his shoulder and kissed it. Mr. Crisparkle beamed at the books, but not so brightly as when he had entered. "I gather from your silence on the subject that my late guardian is adverse, Mr. Crisparkle," the minor canon answered. "Your late guardian is a most unreasonable person, and it signifies nothing to any reasonable person whether he is adverse, perverse, or the reverse." "Well for me that I have enough with economy to live upon," sighed Neville, half wearily and half cheerily, "while I wait to be learned, and wait to be righted. Else I might have proved the proverb that while the grass grows, the steed starves." He opened some books as he said it, and was soon immersed in their interleaved and annotated passages, while Mr. Crisparkle sat beside him, expounding, correcting, and advising. The minor canon's cathedral duties made these visits of his difficult to accomplish, and only to be compassed at intervals of many weeks. But they were as serviceable as they were precious to Neville Landless. When they had got through such studies as they had in hand, they stood leaning on the window-sill and looking down upon the patch of garden. "Next week," said Mr. Crisparkle, "you will cease to be alone, and will have a devoted companion." "And yet," returned Neville, "this seems an uncongenial place to bring my sister to." "I don't think so," said the minor canon. "There is duty to be done here, and there are womanly feeling, sense, and courage wanted here. I meant," explained Neville, "that the surroundings are so dull and unwomanly, and that Helena can have no suitable friend or society here." "You have only to remember," said Mr. Crisparkle, "that you are here yourself, and that she has to draw you into the sunlight." They were silent for a little while, and then Mr. Crisparkle began anew. "When we first spoke together, Neville, you told me that your sister had risen out of the disadvantages of your past lives as superior to you as the tower of Cloisterham Cathedral is higher than the chimneys of Minor Canon Corner. Do you remember that?" "Right well." "I was inclined to think it at the time an enthusiastic flight. No matter what I think it now, what I would emphasize is that under the head of pride your sister is a great and opportune example to you. Under all heads that are included in the composition of a fine character, she is. Say so, but take this one. Your sister has learnt how to govern what is proud in her nature. She can dominate it, even when it is wounded through her sympathy with you. No doubt she has suffered deeply in those same streets where you suffered deeply. No doubt her life is darkened by the cloud that darkens yours. But bending her pride into a grand composure that is not haughty or aggressive, but is a sustained confidence in you and in the truth, she has won her way through those streets until she passes along them as high in the general respect as anyone who treads them. Every day and hour of her life since Edwin Drood's disappearance, she has faced malignity and folly, for you, as only a brave nature well directed can. So it will be with her to the end. Another and weaker kind of pride might sink broken-hearted, but never such a pride as hers, which knows no shrinking, and can get no mastery over her." The pale cheek beside him flushed under the comparison and the hint implied in it. "I will do all I can to imitate her," said Neville. "Do so, and be a truly brave man, as she is a truly brave woman," answered Mr. Crisparkle stoutly. "It is growing dark. Will you go my way with me when it is quite dark? Mind, it is not I who wait for darkness." Neville replied that he would accompany him directly. But Mr. Crisparkle said he had a moment's call to make on Mr. Grewgious as an act of courtesy, and would run across to that gentleman's chambers and rejoin Neville on his own doorstep if he would come down there to meet him. Mr. Grewgious, bolt upright as usual, sat taking his wine in the dusk at his open window, his wine-glass and decanter on the round table at his elbow, himself and his legs on the window-seat, only one hinge in his whole body, like a bootjack. "How do you do, Reverend Sir?" said Mr. Grewgious, with abundant offers of hospitality, which were as cordially declined as made. "And how is your charge getting on over the way in the set that I had the pleasure of recommending to you as vacant and eligible?" Mr. Crisparkle replied suitably. "I am glad you approve of them," said Mr. Grewgious, "because I entertain a sort of fancy for having him under my eye." As Mr. Grewgious had to turn his eye up considerably before he could see the chambers, the phrase was to be taken figuratively and not literally. "And how did you leave Mr. Jasper, Reverend Sir?" said Mr. Grewgious. Mr. Crisparkle had left him pretty well. "And where did you leave Mr. Jasper, Reverend Sir?" Mr. Crisparkle had left him at Cloisterham. "And when did you leave Mr. Jasper, Reverend Sir, that morning?" "Umps," said Mr. Grewgious. "He didn't say he was coming, perhaps?" "Coming where? Anywhere, for instance," said Mr. Grewgious. "No." "Because here he is," said Mr. Grewgious, who had asked all these questions with his preoccupied glance directed out at window. "And he don't look agreeable, does he?" Mr. Crisparkle was craning towards the window when Mr. Grewgious added, "If you will kindly step round here behind me, in the gloom of the room, and will cast your eye at the second-floor landing window in yonder house, I think you will hardly fail to see a slinking individual in whom I recognise our local friend." "You are right," cried Mr. Crisparkle. "Umps," said Mr. Grewgious. Then he added, turning his face so abruptly that his head nearly came into collision with Mr. Crisparkle's, "What should you say that our local friend was up to?" The last passage he had been shown in the diary returned on Mr. Crisparkle's mind with the force of a strong recoil, and he asked Mr. Grewgious if he thought it possible that Neville was to be harassed by the keeping of a watch upon him. "A watch?" repeated Mr. Grewgious musingly. "Ay, which would not only of itself haunt and torture his life," said Mr. Crisparkle warmly, "but would expose him to the torment of a perpetually reviving suspicion, whatever he might do or wherever he might go." "Ay," said Mr. Grewgious musingly still, "do I see him waiting for you?" "No doubt you do." "Then would you have the goodness to excuse my getting up to see you out, and to go out to join him, and to go the way that you were going, and to take no notice of our local friend?" said Mr. Grewgious. "I entertain a sort of fancy for having him under my eye tonight, do you know?" Mr. Crisparkle, with a significant nod, complied, and rejoining Neville, went away with him. They dined together, and parted at the yet unfinished and undeveloped railway station, Mr. Crisparkle to get home, Neville to walk the streets, cross the bridges, make a wide round of the city in the friendly darkness, and tire himself out. It was midnight when he returned from his solitary expedition and climbed his staircase. The night was hot, and the windows of the staircase were all wide open. Coming to the top, it gave him a passing chill of surprise, there being no rooms but his up there, to find a stranger sitting on the window-sill, more after the manner of a venturesome blazier than an amateur ordinarily careful of his neck. In fact, so much more outside the window than inside, as to suggest the thought that he must have come up by the waterspout instead of the stairs. The stranger said nothing until Neville put his key in his door. Then, seeming to make sure of his identity from the action, he spoke. "I beg your pardon," he said, coming from the window with a frank and smiling air and a prepossessing address, "the beans." Neville was quite at a loss. "Runners," said the visitor. "Scarlet, next door at the back." "Oh," returned Neville, "and the mignonette and wallflower?" "The same," said the visitor. "Pray walk in." "Thank you." Neville lighted his candles, and the visitor sat down. A handsome gentleman, with a young face, but with an older figure in its robustness and its breadth of shoulder. Say a man of 28, or at the utmost 30, so extremely sunburnt that the contrast between his brown visage and the white forehead shaded out of doors by his hat, and the glimpses of white throat below the neckerchief, would have been almost ludicrous but for his broad temples, bright blue eyes, clustering brown hair, and laughing teeth. "I have noticed," said he. "My name is Tartar." Neville inclined his head. "I have noticed, excuse me, that you shut yourself up a good deal, and that you seem to like my garden aloft here. If you would like a little more of it, I could throw out a few lines and stays between my windows and yours, which the runners would take to directly. And I have some boxes, both of mignonette and wallflower, that I could shove on along the gutter, with a boat-hook I have by me, to your windows, and draw back again when they wanted watering or gardening, and shove on again when they were ship-shape, so that they would cause you no trouble. I couldn't take this liberty without asking your permission, so I venture to ask it." Tartar, corresponding set, next door. You are very kind. Not at all. I ought to apologize for looking in so late, but having noticed, excuse me, that you generally walk out at night, I thought I should inconvenience you least by awaiting your return. I am always afraid of inconveniencing busy men, being an idle man. I should not have thought so from your appearance. No? I take it as a compliment. In fact, I was bred in the Royal Navy and was first lieutenant when I quitted it. But, an uncle disappointed in the service leaving me his property on condition that I left the Navy, I accepted the fortune and resigned my commission. Lately, I presume. Well, I had had 12 or 15 years of knocking about first. I came here some 9 months before you. I had had one crop before you came. I chose this place because, having served last in a little corvette, I knew I should feel more at home where I had a constant opportunity of knocking my head against the ceiling. Besides, it would never do for a man who had been aboard ship from his boyhood to turn luxurious all at once. Besides, again, having been accustomed to a very short allowance of land all my life, I thought I'd feel my way to the command of a landed estate by beginning in boxes. Whimsically as this was said, there was a touch of merry earnestness in it that made it doubly whimsical. However, said the lieutenant, I have talked quite enough about myself. It is not my way, I hope. It has merely been to present myself to you naturally. If you will allow me to take the liberty I have described, it will be a charity, for it will give me something more to do. And you are not to suppose that it will entail any interruption or intrusion on you, for that is far from my intention. Neville replied that he was greatly obliged, and that he thankfully accepted the kind proposal. I am very glad to take your windows in tow, said the lieutenant. From what I have seen of you when I have been gardening at mine, and you have been looking on, I have thought you, excuse me, rather too studious and delicate. May I ask, is your health at all affected? I have undergone some mental distress, said Neville, confused, which has stood me in the stead of illness. Pardon me, said Mr. Tartar. With the greatest delicacy he shifted his ground to the windows again and asked if he could look at one of them. On Neville's opening it, he immediately sprang out, as if he were going aloft with a whole watch in an emergency, and was setting a bright example. For heaven's sake, cried Neville, don't do that. Where are you going, Mr. Tartar? You'll be dashed to pieces. Oh, well, said the lieutenant, coolly looking about him on the housetop, all taut and trim here. Those lines and stays shall be rigged before you turn out in the morning. May I take this short cut home and say good night? Mr. Tartar, urged Neville. Pray, it makes me giddy to see you. But Mr. Tartar, with a wave of his hand and the deftness of a cat, had already dipped through his scuttle of scarlet runners without breaking a leaf, and gone below. Mr. Grewgious, his bedroom window blind held aside with his hand, happened at the moment to have Neville's chambers under his eye for the last time that night. Fortunately, his eye was on the front of the house and not the back, or this remarkable appearance and disappearance might have broken his rest as a phenomenon. But Mr. Grewgious seeing nothing there, not even a light in the windows, his gaze wandered from the windows to the stars, as if he would have read in them something that was hidden from him. Many of us would, if we could, but none of us so much as know our letters in the stars yet, or seem likely to do it, in this state of existence. And few languages can be read until their alphabets are mastered. Chapter 18. A settler, I.N. Cloisterham. At about this time a stranger appeared in Cloisterham, a white-haired personage with black eyebrows. Being buttoned up in a tightish blue surtout, with a buff waistcoat and grey trousers, he had something of a military air, but he announced himself at the Crozier, the orthodox hotel, where he put up with a portmanteau, as an idle dog who lived upon his means. And he farther announced that he had a mind to take a lodging in the picturesque old city for a month or two, with a view of settling down there altogether. Both announcements were made in the coffee-room of the Crozier, to all whom it might or might not concern, by the stranger as he stood with his back to the empty fireplace, waiting for his fried sole, veal cutlet, and pint of sherry. And the waiter, business being chronically slack at the Crozier, represented all whom it might or might not concern, and absorbed the whole of the information. This gentleman's white head was unusually large, and his shock of white hair was unusually thick and ample. I suppose, waiter, he said, shaking his shock of hair, as a Newfoundland dog might shake his before sitting down to dinner, that a fair lodging for a single buffer might be found in these parts, eh? The waiter had no doubt of it. Something old, said the gentleman. Take my hat down for a moment from that peg, will you? No, I don't want it. Look into it. What do you see written there? The waiter read, Datchery. Now you know my name, said the gentleman. Dick Datchery. Hang it up again. I was saying something old is what I should prefer, something odd and out of the way, something venerable, architectural and inconvenient. We have a good choice of inconvenient lodgings in the town, sir, I think, replied the waiter, with modest confidence in its resources that way. Indeed, I have no doubt that we could suit you that far, however particular you might be. But an architectural lodging? That seemed to trouble the waiter's head, and he shook it. Anything cathedral-y now? Mr. Datchery suggested. Mr. Tope, said the waiter, brightening as he rubbed his chin with his hand, would be the likeliest party to inform in that line. Who is Mr. Tope? inquired Dick Datchery. The waiter explained that he was the verger, and that Mrs. Tope had indeed once upon a time let lodgings herself or offered to let them, but that as nobody had ever taken them, Mrs. Tope's window bill, long a Cloisterham institution, had disappeared, probably had tumbled down one day and never been put up again. I'll call on Mrs. Tope, said Mr. Datchery, after dinner. So when he had done his dinner, he was duly directed to the spot, and sallied out for it. But the Crozier being an hotel of a most retiring disposition, and the waiter's directions being fatally precise, he soon became bewildered and went boggling about and about the cathedral tower whenever he could catch a glimpse of it, with a general impression on his mind that Mrs. Tope's was somewhere very near it, and that, like the children in the game of hot-boiled beans and very good butter, he was warm in his search when he saw the tower, and cold when he didn't see it. He was getting very cold indeed when he came upon a fragment of burial ground in which an unhappy sheep was grazing. Unhappy, because a hideous small boy was stoning it through the railings and had already lamed it in one leg, and was much excited by the benevolent sportsmanlike purpose of breaking its other 3 legs and bringing it down. Imagine, cried the boy, as the poor creature leaped, and made a dint in his wool. Let him be, said Mr. Datchery. Don't you see you have lamed him? Ye lie, returned the sportsman. He went and lamed hisself. I see him do it, and I give him a shy as a widdy warning to him not to go a-bruising his master's mutton any more. Come here. I won't, I'll come when ye can catch me. Stay there then, and show me which is Mr. Tope's. Ow! Can I stay here and show you which is Topes's, when Topes's is t'other side the Kinfriedrel and over the crossings and round ever so many comers? Stupid, yeah? Show me where it is and I'll give you something. Come on then. This brisk dialogue concluded, the boy led the way, and by stopped at some distance from an arched passage, pointing. Look yonder. You see that there window and door? That's Tope's. Ye lie, it ain't. That's Jasper's. Indeed, said Mr. Datchery, with a second look of some interest. Yes, and I ain't a-goin' no nearer, I tell ye. Why not? 'Cause I ain't a-goin' to be lifted off my legs and have my braces bust and be choked, not if I knows it, and not by him. Wait till I set a jolly good flint a-flyin' at the back o' his jolly old head some day. Now look t'other side the harch, not the side where Jasper's door is, t'other side. I see. A little way in, that side, there's a low door, down 2 steps. That's Topes's with his name on a hovel plate. Good. See here, said Mr. Datchery, producing a shilling. You owe me half of this. Ye lie. I don't owe ye nothing, I never seen ye. I tell you owe me half of this, because I have no 6pence in my pocket. So the next time you meet me you shall do something else for me, to pay me. All right, give us old. What is your name, and where do you live? Deputy. Travellers 2 cross the green. The boy instantly darted off with the shilling, lest Mr. Datchery should repent, but stopped at a safe distance on the happy chance of his being uneasy in his mind about it, to goad him with a demon dance expressive of its irrevocability. Mr. Datchery, taking off his hat to give that shock of white hair of his another shake, seemed quite resigned, and betook himself whither he had been directed. Mr. Tope's official dwelling, communicating by an upper stair with Mr. Jasper's, hence Mrs. Tope's attendance on that gentleman, was of very modest proportions, and partook of the character of a cool dungeon. Its ancient walls were massive, and its rooms rather seemed to have been dug out of them than to have been designed beforehand with any reference to them. The main door opened at once on a chamber of no describable shape, with a groined roof, which in its turn opened on another chamber of no describable shape, with another groined roof, their windows small and in the thickness of the walls. These 2 chambers, close as to their atmosphere, and swarthy as to their illumination by natural light, were the apartments which Mrs. Tope had so long offered to an unappreciative city. Mr. Datchery, however, was more appreciative. He found that if he sat with the main door open, he would enjoy the passing society of all comers to and fro by the gateway, and would have light enough. He found that if Mr. and Mrs. Tope, living overhead, used for their own egress and ingress a little side stair that came plump into the precincts by a door opening outward, to the surprise and inconvenience of a limited public of pedestrians in a narrow way, he would be alone, as in a separate residence. He found the rent moderate, and everything as quaintly inconvenient as he could desire. He agreed, therefore, to take the lodging then and there, and money down, possession to be had next evening, on condition that reference was permitted him to Mr. Jasper as occupying the gatehouse, of which on the other side of the gateway, the verger's hole, in the wall, was an appanage or subsidiary part. And the poor dear gentleman was very solitary and very sad, Mrs. Tope said. But she had no doubt he would speak for her. Perhaps Mr. Datchery had heard something of what had occurred there last winter. Mr. Datchery had as confused a knowledge of the event in question, on trying to recall it, as he well could have. He begged Mrs. Tope's pardon when she found it incumbent on her to correct him in every detail of his summary of the facts, but pleaded that he was merely a single buffer, getting through life upon his means as idly as he could, and that so many people were so constantly making away with so many other people, as to render it difficult for a buffer of an easy temper to preserve the circumstances of the several cases unmixed in his mind. Mr. Jasper, proving willing to speak for Mrs. Tope, Mr. Datchery, who had sent up his card, was invited to ascend the postern staircase. The mayor was there, Mr. Tope said, but he was not to be regarded in the light of company, as he and Mr. Jasper were great friends. "I beg pardon," said Mr. Datchery, making a leg with his hat under his arm, as he addressed himself equally to both gentlemen. "A selfish precaution on my part, and not personally interesting to anybody but myself. But as a buffer living on his means, and having an idea of doing it in this lovely place in peace and quiet, for remaining span of life, I beg to ask if the Tope family are quite respectable." Mr. Jasper could answer for that without the slightest hesitation. "That is enough, sir," said Mr. Datchery. "My friend the mayor," added Mr. Jasper, presenting Mr. Datchery with a courtly motion of his hand towards that potentate, "whose recommendation is actually much more important to a stranger than that of an obscure person like myself, will testify in their behalf, I am sure." "The worshipful, the mayor," said Mr. Datchery, with a low bow, "places me under an infinite obligation." "Very good people, sir, Mr. and Mrs. Tope," said Mr. Sapsea, with condescension. "Very good opinions, very well behaved, very respectful, much approved by the Dean and Chapter." "The worshipful the mayor gives them a character," said Mr. Datchery, "of which they may indeed be proud. I would ask his honour, if I might be permitted, whether there are not many objects of great interest in the city which is under his beneficent sway." "We are, sir," returned Mr. Sapsea, "an ancient city and an ecclesiastical city. We are a constitutional city, as it becomes such a city to be, and we uphold and maintain our glorious privileges." "His honour," said Mr. Datchery, bowing, "inspires me with a desire to know more of the city, and confirms me in my inclination to end my days in the city." "Retired from the army, sir?" suggested Mr. Sapsea. "His honour the mayor does me too much credit," returned Mr. Datchery. "Navy, sir?" suggested Mr. Sapsea. "Again," repeated Mr. Datchery, "his honour the mayor does me too much credit." "Diplomacy is a fine profession," said Mr. Sapsea, as a general remark. "There, I confess, his honour the mayor is too many for me," said Mr. Datchery, with an ingenious smile and bow. "Even a diplomatic bird must fall to such a gun." Now this was very soothing. Here was a gentleman of a great, not to say a grand address, accustomed to rank and dignity, really setting a fine example how to behave to a mayor. There was something in that third-person style of being spoken to that Mr. Sapsea found particularly recognizant of his merits and position. "But I crave pardon," said Mr. Datchery. "His honour the mayor will bear with me, if for a moment I have been deluded into occupying his time, and have forgotten the humble claims upon my own, of my hotel, the Crozier." "Not at all, sir," said Mr. Sapsea. "I am returning home, and if you would like to take the exterior of our cathedral in your way, I shall be glad to point it out." "His honour the mayor," said Mr. Datchery, "is more than kind and gracious." As Mr. Datchery, when he had made his acknowledgments to Mr. Jasper, could not be induced to go out of the room before the worshipful led the way downstairs, Mr. Datchery following with his hat under his arm, and his shock of white hair streaming in the evening breeze. "Might I ask his honour," said Mr. Datchery, "whether that gentleman we have just left is the gentleman of whom I have heard in the neighbourhood as being much afflicted by the loss of a nephew, and concentrating his life on avenging the loss?" "That is the gentleman." "John Jasper, sir? Would his honour allow me to inquire whether there are strong suspicions of anyone?" "More than suspicions, sir," returned Mr. Sapsea. "All but certainties." "Only think now," cried Mr. Datchery. "But proof, sir, proof must be built up stone by stone," said the mayor. "As I say, the end crowns the work. It is not enough that justice should be morally certain, she must be immorally certain, legally that is." "His honour," said Mr. Datchery, "reminds me of the nature of the law, immoral." "How true?" "As I say, sir," pompously went on the mayor, "the arm of the law is a strong arm and a long arm, that is the way I put it, a strong arm and a long arm." "How forcible, and yet, again, how true," murmured Mr. Datchery. "And without betraying what I call the secrets of the prison house," said Mr. Sapsea. "The secrets of the prison house is the term I used on the bench." "And what other term than his honour's would express it?" said Mr. Datchery. "Without, I say, betraying them, I predict to you, knowing the iron will of the gentleman we have just left, I take the bold step of calling it iron on account of its strength, that in this case the long arm will reach and the strong arm will strike. This is our cathedral, sir. The best judges are pleased to admire it, and the best among our townsmen own to being a little vain of it." All this time Mr. Datchery had walked with his hat under his arm and his white hair streaming. He had an odd momentary appearance upon him of having forgotten his hat, when Mr. Sapsea now touched it, and he clapped his hand up to his head as if with some vague expectation of finding another hat upon it. "Pray be covered, sir," entreated Mr. Sapsea, magnificently plying. "I shall not mind it, I assure you." "His honour is very good, but I do it for coolness," said Mr. Datchery. Then Mr. Datchery admired the cathedral, and Mr. Sapsea pointed it out as if he himself had invented and built it. There were a few details, indeed, of which he did not approve, but those he glossed over, as if the workman had made mistakes in his absence. The cathedral disposed of, he led the way by the churchyard, and stopped to extol the beauty of the evening by chance in the immediate vicinity of Mrs. Sapsea's epitaph. "And by the by," said Mr. Sapsea, appearing to descend from an elevation to remember it all of a sudden, like Apollo shooting down from Olympus to pick up his forgotten lyre, "that is one of our small lions. The partiality of our people has made it so, and strangers have been seen taking a copy of it now and then. I am not a judge of it myself, for it is a little work of my own. But it was troublesome to turn, sir, I may say, difficult to turn with elegance." Mr. Datchery became so ecstatic over Mr. Sapsea's composition that, in spite of his intention to end his days in Cloisterham, and therefore his probably having in reserve many opportunities of copying it, he would have transcribed it into his pocket-book on the spot, but for the slouching towards them of its material producer and perpetuator, Durdles, whom Mr. Sapsea hailed, not sorry to show him a bright example of behaviour to superiors. "Ah, Durdles, this is the mason, sir, one of our Cloisterham worthies. Everybody here knows Durdles. Mr. Datchery, Durdles a gentleman who is going to settle here." "I wouldn't do it if I was him," growled Durdles. "We're a heavy lot." "You surely don't speak for yourself, Mr. Durdles," returned Mr. Datchery, "any more than for his honour." "Who's his honour?" demanded Durdles. "His honour the mayor. I never was brought afore him," said Durdles, with anything but the look of a loyal subject of the mayoralty, "and it'll be time enough for me to honour him when I am. Until which, and when, and where, Mr. Sapsea is his name, England is his nation, Cloisterham's his dwelling place, auctioneer's his occupation." Here, Deputy, preceded by a flying oyster-shell, appeared upon the scene, and requested to have the sum of 3d instantly chucked to him by Mr. Durdles, whom he had been vainly seeking up and down, as lawful wages overdue. While that gentleman, with his bundle under his arm, slowly found and counted out the money, Mr. Sapsea informed the new settler of Durdles's habits, pursuits, abode, and reputation. "I suppose a curious stranger might come to see you, and your works, Mr. Durdles, at any odd time," said Mr. Datchery upon that. "Any gentleman is welcome to come and see me any evening if he brings liquor for two with him," returned Durdles with a penny between his teeth and certain halfpence in his hands, "or if he likes to make it twice two, he'll be doubly welcome." "I shall come." "Master Deputy, what do you owe me?" "A job." Mind you pay me honestly with the job of showing me Mr. Durdles's house when I want to go there." Deputy, with a piercing broadside of whistle through the whole gap in his mouth, as a receipt in full for all arrears, vanished. And the worshipful and the worshipper then passed on together until they parted, with many ceremonies, at the worshipful's door. Even then the worshipper carried his hat under his arm and gave his streaming white hair to the breeze. Said Mr. Datchery to himself that night, as he looked at his white hair in the gas-lighted looking-glass over the coffee-room chimney-piece at the Crozier, and shook it out. For a single buffer, of an easy temper, living idly on his means, I have had a rather busy afternoon. Chapter 19. Shadow, ONTHESUN dial. Again Miss Twinkleton has delivered her valedictory address, with the accompaniments of white wine and pound cake, and again the young ladies have departed to their several homes. Helena Landless has left the nun's house to attend her brother's fortunes, and pretty Rosa is alone. Cloisterham is so bright and sunny in these summer days that the cathedral and the monastery ruins show as if their strong walls were transparent. A soft glow seems to shine from within them, rather than upon them from without. Such is their mellowness as they look forth on the hot cornfields and the smoking roads that distantly wind among them. The Cloisterham gardens blush with ripening fruit. Time was when travel-stained pilgrims rode in clattering parties through the city's welcome shades. Time is when wayfarers, leading a gypsy life between haymaking time and harvest, and looking as if they were just made of the dust of the earth, so very dusty are they, lounge about on cool doorsteps, trying to mend their unmendable shoes, or giving them to the city kennels as a hopeless job, and seeking others in the bundles that they carry, along with their yet unused sickles swathed in bands of straw. At all the more public pumps there is much cooling of bare feet, together with much bubbling and gurgling of drinking with hand to spout on the part of these Bedouins. The Cloisterham police meanwhile looking askant from their beats with suspicion, and manifest impatience that the intruders should depart from within the civic bounds, and once more fry themselves on the simmering highroads. On the afternoon of such a day, when the last cathedral service is done, and when that side of the high street on which the nun's house stands is in grateful shade, save where its quaint old garden opens to the west between the boughs of trees, a servant informs Rosa, to her terror, that Mr. Jasper desires to see her. If he had chosen his time for finding her to disadvantage, he could have done no better. Perhaps he has chosen it. Helena Landless is gone, Mrs. Tisher is absent on leave, Miss Twinkleton, in her amateur state of existence, has contributed herself and a veal pie to a picnic. "Oh, why did you say I was at home?" cried Rosa helplessly. The maid replies that Mr. Jasper never asked the question, that he said he knew she was at home, and begged she might be told that he asked to see her. "What shall I do? What shall I do?" thinks Rosa, clasping her hands. Possessed by a kind of desperation, she adds in the next breath that she will come to Mr. Jasper in the garden. She shudders at the thought of being shut up with him in the house, but many of its windows command the garden, and she can be seen as well as heard there, and can shriek in the free air and run away. Such is the wild idea that flutters through her mind. She has never seen him since the fatal night, except when she was questioned before the mayor, and then he was present in gloomy watchfulness, as representing his lost nephew and burning to avenge him. She hangs her garden hat on her arm and goes out. The moment she sees him from the porch, leaning on the sundial, the old horrible feeling of being compelled by him asserts its hold upon her. She feels that she would even then go back, but that he draws her feet towards him. She cannot resist, and sits down, with her head bent, on the garden seat beside the sundial. She cannot look up at him for abhorrence, but she has perceived that he is dressed in deep mourning. So is she. It was not so at first, but the lost has long been given up and mourned for as dead. He would begin by touching her hand. She feels the intention and draws her hand back. His eyes are then fixed upon her, she knows, though her own see nothing but the grass. "I have been waiting," he begins, "for some time to be summoned back to my duty near you." After several times forming her lips, which she knows he is closely watching, into the shape of some other hesitating reply, and then into none, she answers, "Duty, sir? The duty of teaching you, serving you as your faithful music master. I have left off that study. Not left off, I think, discontinued. I was told by your guardian that you discontinued it under the shock that we have all felt so acutely. When will you resume?" "Never, sir. Never, sir. Never. You could have done no more if you had loved my dear boy." I did love him, cried Rosa, with a flash of anger. Yes, but not quite. Not quite in the right way, shall I say. Not in the intended and expected way. Much as my dear boy was, unhappily, too self-conscious and self-satisfied, I'll draw no parallel between him and you in that respect, to love as he should have loved, or as anyone in his place would have loved, must have loved. She sits in the same still attitude, but shrinking a little more. Then, to be told that you discontinued your study with me was to be politely told that you abandoned it altogether, he suggested. Yes, says Rosa, with sudden spirit, the politeness was my guardian's, not mine. I told him that I was resolved to leave off, and that I was determined to stand by my resolution. And you still are? I still am, sir, and I beg not to be questioned any more about it. At all events, I will not answer any more. I have that in my power. She is so conscious of his looking at her with a gloating admiration of the touch of anger on her, and the fire and animation it brings with it, that even as her spirit rises, it falls again, and she struggles with a sense of shame, affront, and fear, much as she did that night at the piano. I will not question you any more, since you object to it so much. I will confess. I do not wish to hear you, sir, cries Rosa, rising. This time he does touch her with his outstretched hand. In shrinking from it, she shrinks into her seat again. We must sometimes act in opposition to our wishes, he tells her in a low voice. You must do so now, or do more harm to others than you can ever set right. What harm? Presently. You question me, you see, and surely that's not fair when you forbid me to question you. Nevertheless, I will answer the question presently. Dearest Rosa, charming Rosa. She starts up again. This time he does not touch her, but his face looks so wicked and menacing as he stands leaning against the sun, dial setting, as it were, his black mark upon the very face of day, that her flight is arrested by horror as she looks at him. I do not forget how many windows command a view of us, he says, glancing towards them. I will not touch you again. I will come no nearer to you than I am. Sit down, and there will be no mighty wonder in your music, masters leaning idly against a pedestal and speaking with you, remembering all that has happened and our shares in it. Sit down, my beloved. She would have gone once more, was all but gone, and once more his face, darkly threatening what would follow if she went, has stopped her. Looking at him with the expression of the instant frozen on her face, she sits down on the seat again. Rosa, even when my dear boy was affianced to you, I loved you madly. Even when I thought his happiness in having you for his wife was certain, I loved you madly. Even when I strove to make him more ardently devoted to you, I loved you madly. Even when he gave me the picture of your lovely face so carelessly traduced by him, which I feigned to hang always in my sight for his sake, but worshipped in torment for years, I loved you madly, in the distasteful work of the day, in the wakeful misery of the night, girded by sordid realities, or wandering through paradises and hells of visions into which I rushed, carrying your image in my arms. I loved you madly. If anything could make his words more hideous to her than they are in themselves, it would be the contrast between the violence of his look and delivery, and the composure of his assumed attitude. I endured it all in silence. So long as you were his, or so long as I supposed you to be his, I hid my secret loyally. Did I not? This lie, so gross, while the mere words in which it is told are so true, is more than Rosa can endure. She answers with kindling indignation. You were as false throughout, sir, as you are now. You were false to him, daily and hourly. You know that you made my life unhappy by your pursuit of me. You know that you made me afraid to open his generous eyes, and that you forced me, for his own trusting, good sake, to keep the truth from him, that you were a bad man. His preservation of his easy attitude, rendering his working features and his convulsive hands absolutely diabolical, he returns, with a fierce extreme of admiration. How beautiful you are! You are more beautiful in anger than in repose. I don't ask you for your love. Give me yourself and your hatred. Give me yourself and that pretty rage. Give me yourself and that enchanting scorn. It will be enough for me. Impatient tears rise to the eyes of the trembling little beauty, and her face flames. But as she again rises to leave him in indignation and seek protection within the house, he stretches out his hand towards the porch, as though he invited her to enter it. I told you, you rare charmer, you sweet witch, that you must stay and hear me, or do more harm than can ever be undone. You ask me what harm. Stay, and I will tell you. Go, and I will do it. Again Rosa quails before his threatening face, though innocent of its meaning, and she remains. Her panting breathing comes and goes as if it would choke her, but with a repressive hand upon her bosom she remains. I have made my confession that my love is mad. It is so mad that had the ties between me and my dear lost boy been one silken thread less strong, I might have swept even him from your side when you favoured him. A film comes over the eyes she raises for an instant, as though he had turned her faint. Even him, he repeats. Yes, even him, Rosa. You see me and you hear me. Judge for yourself whether any other admirer shall love you and live, whose life is in my hand. What do you mean, sir? I mean to show you how mad my love is. It was hawked through the late inquiries by Mr. Crisparkle that young Landless had confessed to him that he was a rival of my lost boy. That is an inexpiable offence in my eyes. The same Mr. Crisparkle knows under my hand that I have devoted myself to the murderer's discovery and destruction, be he whom he might, and that I determined to discuss the mystery with no one until I should hold the clue in which to entangle the murderer as in a net. I have since worked patiently to wind and wind it round him, and it is slowly winding as I speak. Your belief, if you believe in the criminality of Mr. Landless, is not Mr. Crisparkle's belief, and he is a good man, Rosa retorts. My belief is my own, and I reserve it, worshipped of my soul. Circumstances may accumulate so strongly even against an innocent man that directed, sharpened, and pointed, they may slay him. One wanting link discovered by perseverance against a guilty man proves his guilt, however slight its evidence before, and he dies. Young Landless stands in deadly peril either way. If you really suppose, Rosa pleads with him, turning paler, that I favour Mr. Landless, or that Mr. Landless has ever in any way addressed himself to me, you are wrong. He puts that from him with a slighting action of his hand and a curled lip. I was going to show you how madly I love you, more madly now than ever, for I am willing to renounce the second object that has arisen in my life to divide it with you, and henceforth to have no object in existence but you only. Miss Landless has become your bosom friend. You care for her peace of mind, I love her dearly. You care for her good name. I have said, sir, I love her dearly. I am unconsciously, he observes with a smile, as he folds his hands upon the sundial and leans his chin upon them, so that his talk would seem from the windows, faces occasionally come and go there, to be of the airiest and playfullest. I am unconsciously giving offence by questioning again. I will simply make statements, therefore, and not put questions. You do care for your bosom friend's good name, and you do care for her peace of mind. Then remove the shadow of the gallows from her, dear one. You dare propose to me to, Darling, I dare propose to you. Stop there. If it be bad to idolize you, I am the worst of men. If it be good, I am the best. My love for you is above all other love, and my truth to you is above all other truth. Let me have hope and favour, and I am a forsworn man for your sake. Rosa puts her hands to her temples and, pushing back her hair, looks wildly and abhorrently at him, as though she were trying to piece together what it is his deep purpose to present to her only in fragments. Reckon up nothing at this moment, angel, but the sacrifices that I lay at those dear feet, which I could fall down among the vilest ashes and kiss, and put upon my head as a poor savage might. There is my fidelity to my dear boy after death. Tread upon it, with an action of his hands, as though he cast down something precious. There is the inexpiable offence against my adoration of you. Spurn it, with a similar action. There are my labours in the cause of a just vengeance for 6 toiling months. Crush them, with another repetition of the action. There is my past and my present wasted life. There is the desolation of my heart and my soul. There is my peace, there is my despair. Stamp them into the dust, so that you take me, were it even mortally hating me. The frightful vehemence of the man, now reaching its full height, so additionally terrifies her as to break the spell that has held her to the spot. She swiftly moves towards the porch, but in an instant he is at her side and speaking in her ear. Rosa, I am self-repressed again. I am walking calmly beside you to the house. I shall wait for some encouragement and hope. I shall not strike too soon. Give me a sign that you attend to me. She slightly and constrainedly moves her hand. Not a word of this to anyone, or it will bring down the blow, as certainly as night follows day. Another sign that you attend to me. She moves her hand once more. I love you, Love you, love you. If you were to cast me off now, but you will not, you would never be rid of me. No one should come between us. I would pursue you to the death. The handmaid coming out to open the gate for him, he quietly pulls off his hat as a parting salute, and goes away with no greater show of agitation than is visible in the effigy of Mr. Sapsea's father opposite. Rosa faints in going upstairs, and is carefully carried to her room and laid down on her bed. A thunderstorm is coming on, the maids say, and the hot and stifling air has overset the pretty dear. No wonder, they have felt their own knees all of a tremble all day long.